The dinner party in the Chicago penthouse was flawless, crystal glassware catching the dim light, the hum of polite conversation masking the emptiness in the room. But as Mark stepped onto the terrace, the illusion shattered not with a scream, but with a whisper he wasn't meant to hear. "Don't worry, Julian. He's just a placeholder." In that moment, the years of devotion didn't just fade. They curdled into a cold, precise need for retribution. There is a terrifying quiet that comes right before a marriage collapses, a silence heavier than any argument. If you want to see what happens when that silence finally breaks, stay with me, because the loudest crashes are the ones no one sees coming. The rain in Chicago didn't wash things clean. It just made the city look like it was weeping behind a pane of gray glass. Mark Vance stood in the center of the living room, a space that felt more like a gallery than a home. The furniture was Italian, low-slung, and uncomfortable, chosen by Elena for its silhouette rather than its warmth. At 38, Mark was a man of structures. As a structural engineer, he understood loads, tension, and the precise moment a beam would snap under pressure. He just hadn't realized he was applying those calculations to the wrong things. It was 11:15 p.m. The only light came from the hallway sconces and the glow of the city filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Elena was out on the terrace. The heavy glass door was technically closed, but the latch hadn't caught. A sliver of damp, cold air drifted into the apartment, carrying the sound of the wind and the murmur of her voice. Mark held a glass of whiskey he hadn't sipped in 20 minutes. He had intended to walk out there, to wrap a shawl around her shoulders because the October wind off Lake Michigan was brutal. He had intended to be the good husband he had been for 7 years, the provider, the safety net, the constant. Then, her laugh drifted through the crack. It was a sound he hadn't heard directed at him in months, a low, throaty, unguarded sound. "Stop it, Julian," Elena said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush that cut through the wind. "You know I can't leave right now. The gallery lease is up for renewal next month, and the endowment board is watching everything I do." Mark froze. His hand tightened around the heavy crystal tumbler. Julian. The name wasn't new. He was the promising abstract artist Elena had been mentoring for 6 months. Mark had paid for the wine at Julian's opening. Mark had shaken the man's hand, a hand that was damp and limp. "It's not about him," Elena continued, her tone shifting to dismissive irritation. "God, don't be jealous. It's pathetic. Mark isn't a threat to us. He doesn't even see me, not really. He sees a schedule, a budget, a wife to take to galas." Mark stopped breathing. The ice in his glass clinked softly, a deafening sound in the silent room. He willed her to stop. "Don't say it. Just cheat on me, break my heart, but don't dismantle me. He's safe, Julian," she said, and the cruelty in her voice was casual, like she was discussing the weather. "He pays the bills. He keeps the lights on. That's it. You're the fire, okay? You're the art. Mark is just a placeholder. Just until your exhibition takes off and I can secure my own funding. Then, we'll see." A placeholder. The word hung in the air, heavier than the steel beams Mark designed for skyscrapers. A placeholder. Not a partner. Not a lover. Not even a person. Just a variable in an equation, holding the spot until the real value arrived. Mark felt a strange physical sensation, like a drop in cabin pressure. The blood drained from his face, leaving him cold, but his mind suddenly sharpened. The fog of the last few months, the excuses she made for late nights, the new passcodes on her phone, the lack of intimacy, cleared instantly. He didn't storm onto the balcony. He didn't throw the whiskey glass against the wall. That was what a man in a movie would do, a man governed by passion. But Elena had just confirmed he wasn't the man of passion. He was the man of logistics. He was the man who made things work. And he was the man who could make things stop working. Mark set the glass down on the marble coaster. He moved silently across the room, the plush carpet swallowing his footsteps. He walked past the terrace door, seeing Elena's silhouette against the railing, a glass of wine in one hand, her phone pressed to her ear, smiling at a lie. He entered his study and closed the door, locking it with a soft click. The room was cool, smelling of old paper and cedar. He sat at his mahogany desk and woke his computer. The screen illuminated his face in a harsh blue light. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. He didn't tremble. If anything, he felt a terrifying calm. He navigated to the private banking portal. Welcome, Mark. He clicked on Accounts. There it was. The Advanced Joint Operations account. It was the artery that fed their entire lifestyle. It paid for the penthouse mortgage, the lease on Elena's gallery in River North, her wardrobe, her spinning classes, and likely, the dinners she was buying for Julian. Balance, $482,000. It was money he had earned. Money she felt entitled to because she graced him with her presence. He opened a second window, his personal, premarital trust, an account Elena knew existed but couldn't access. He initiated a transfer. Amount, $480,000. He left $2,000. Enough for groceries. Not enough for the lifestyle of a Gold Coast socialite. Processing. He wasn't done. He navigated to the credit card tab. The black card. The one she used to flash at waiters and valets. Status, active. Mark clicked report lost/stolen. Are you sure you want to freeze this account immediately? Mark looked at the screen. He thought about the last 7 years. The way he had rushed home early tonight to surprise her, only to find her on the balcony, erasing him from his own life. I'm just a placeholder, he whispered to the empty room. He clicked confirm. Account frozen. The screen blinked, acknowledging the command. In the digital world, the destruction was instantaneous. In the real world, the shockwave hadn't hit yet. Mark leaned back in his chair. He could still hear the faint murmur of her voice from the other room. She was still laughing, still planning a future with Julian, completely unaware that the ground beneath her feet had just ceased to exist. He turned off the monitor. The room plunged back into darkness. He decided he wouldn't sleep in the guest room. That would signal a fight. He would sleep in their bed. He would lie next to her, breathe the same air, and wait. He wanted to be there when she tried to swipe that card tomorrow morning. Mark lay in the dark, his breathing measured, his eyes fixed on the faint shadow of the ceiling fan blade. It was motionless. Everything in the room was motionless, except for the racing current of his own thoughts. 10 minutes after he had frozen the accounts, the handle of the bedroom door turned. Mark closed his eyes. He shifted his weight, mimicking the heavy, settled posture of a man deep in sleep. He heard the soft swish of silk, Elena's robe falling to the bench at the foot of the bed. Then came the smell. It wasn't the perfume he had bought her for their anniversary. It was the sharp, metallic scent of the autumn rain clinging to her hair, mixed with the lingering oaky aroma of the expensive Cabernet she had been drinking on the terrace. The mattress dipped. She didn't reach for him. In the early years, she would have curled against his back, her cold feet seeking his warmth. Now, she stayed on her edge of the California King, creating a vast, cool demilitarized zone between them. Mark listened to the rhythm of her breathing. He could hear the faint, rapid tapping of thumbs on glass. She was texting. Under the covers, the glow of her phone screen would be a small, private tint of light. Good night, Jay. He imagined the text. He's asleep. Just the boring hum of the HVAC in me. Mark lay there, fully awake, dissecting the woman next to him. He realized with a jolt that he didn't hate her. Hate implied passion. Hate implied that he still valued her opinion. What he felt was the clinical detachment of an engineer looking at a building that had been condemned. The structure was still standing, the facade was still beautiful, but the foundation was rotted through. It was just a matter of controlled demolition now. He finally drifted into a restless sleep, haunted by the word placeholder. The morning light hit the penthouse with the subtlety of a spotlight. Mark was up before the alarm. He was already dressed in his charcoal suit, tie knotted perfectly, standing in the kitchen when Elena emerged. She looked disheveled in a way that used to make his heart ache with affection. Now he just noted the dark circles under her eyes, stress from the gallery, or perhaps the exhaustion of living a double life. Coffee? Mark asked. His voice sounded normal. He was surprised by how easy it was. Please, Elena said, not looking at him. She went straight to the kitchen island, scrolling through her iPad. God, the caterer for the gala is demanding the deposit by noon. Did you transfer the funds to the joint account like I asked? Mark pressed the button on the espresso machine. The grinder whirred, a harsh, mechanical scream that filled the silence. I handled the banking last night, Mark said. It wasn't a lie. Good, she said, finally glancing up. She looked at him, really looked at him, for a split second. You're dressed early. Big meeting? Site inspection, Mark said. He placed the espresso cup in front of her. West Loop project. The foundation is tricky. If you don't catch the cracks early, the whole thing comes down. Elena blew on the steam, missing the double meaning entirely. Well, don't be late tonight. The board wants to meet you. Try to be engaging. Julian is bringing some potential buyers, and I need everyone to get along. Julian will be there? Mark asked, turning to rinse a spoon in the sink. He's the featured artist, Mark. Of course he'll be there. Her tone shifted to that familiar, patronizing edge. Just try not to talk about structural loads, okay? It bores people. I'll do my best, Mark said. He watched her sip the coffee he had made. She was drinking his coffee, standing in his kitchen, wearing a silk blouse he had paid for, planning a party for her lover on his dime. The asymmetry of the situation was almost impressive. Elena checked the time on the microwave. I have to run. I promised to meet the florist at 9. She grabbed her purse, the black leather tote that held the wallet that held the black card. She paused by the door, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. She smoothed her hair, practicing her smile, the dazzling, charismatic smile that opened doors and wallets across Chicago. Bye, she called out, already opening the door. Elena, Mark said. She stopped, hand on the latch, looking back with impatience. What? Mark stood by the marble island, hands in his pockets. He looked at her, memorizing the confidence in her posture. This was the last time he would ever see her like this. Arrogant, secure, untouchable. Have a productive day, he said. She rolled her eyes, a small smirk playing on her lips. Always. The door clicked shut. Mark stood alone in the silence. He walked over to the window and looked down at the street, 50 stories below. Minutes later, he saw her small figure emerge from the building, rushing toward a waiting taxi. He checked his watch. 8:15 a.m. She would be at the florist in 45 minutes. She would attempt to put down a deposit for $3,000 worth of white orchids. Mark pulled out his phone. He opened the banking app again, just to double-check. Status, frozen. Alerts on. He put the phone back in his pocket and picked up his briefcase. It was going to be a very long day for his wife. For him, it was just business. The boutique florist, Verdant, was located in a converted warehouse in the West Loop, the kind of place that smelled of damp earth, espresso, and money. It was a space where moss was sold by the square inch and orchids were bred to defy nature. Elena walked in with the brisk entitlement of a woman who had never been told no by a retailer. Her heels clicked sharply on the polished concrete floor. Sasha. Elena greeted the owner, a woman with severe bangs and an apron that cost more than most people's suits. I need the order for the Art Institute gala finalized. The white phalaenopsis. And we need to double the greenery for the archway. Julian thinks the light at the venue is too harsh. We need to soften it. Sasha looked up from her tablet, her smile practiced. Elena, we were just checking the inventory. Doubling the greenery is going to push the budget up significantly. We're looking at another $1,500 minimum. Elena waved a hand dismissively, examining a fern with critical disinterest. It's fine. Just add it to the invoice. We need it perfect. She spent the next 20 minutes directing the staff, moving vases 2 inches to the left, critiquing the shade of green in the ivy. She was in her element, curating, controlling, spending. For Elena, spending money was a form of creative expression. It was how she showed Julian she believed in him. It was how she showed the world she mattered. Finally, she approached the counter to settle the deposit. The air outside was still gray and weeping, but inside, it was a humid, fragrant sanctuary. Total deposit comes to $4,200, Sasha said, turning the white iPad screen toward Elena. Elena didn't even look at the total. She opened her black leather wallet and slid out the heavy, matte black credit card. It was cold to the touch. She tapped it against the reader with a fluid, muscle memory motion. Beep. A low, dissonant tone. Elena was already looking at her phone, checking a text from Julian. Did you get the wine? When the silence from Sasha made her look up. It didn't go through, Sasha said quietly. Probably the chip. The readers have been finicky with the rain. It's a brand new card, Elena said, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. Try the strip. Sasha took the card. She swiped it. Processing. The machine thought for a long, agonizing 5 seconds. Declined. The word flashed in red on the small screen facing the customer. It was a violent color in the midst of all that tasteful green. That's impossible, Elena said, her laugh short and incredulous. I just used it yesterday for dinner. Try it again. I did, Elena. It says do not honor. The air in the shop seemed to thin. A junior florist arranging hydrangeas in the corner paused, glancing over. The silence was sudden and heavy. Elena felt a prickle of heat rise up her neck. It's a bank glitch. Mark probably flagged it for unusual activity because of the amount. He's so paranoid about security. She let out a sigh, performing the role of the exasperated wife. Here, use the Visa. She pulled out the backup card, the joint platinum Visa. This was the grocery card, the emergency card. Sasha took it, inserted it. Elena tapped her fingers on the marble counter. Tap, tap, tap. She stared at a bucket of peonies, willing the machine to chirp its approval. Declined. Sasha didn't say anything this time. She just looked at Elena. The look wasn't sympathetic, it was curious. It was the look one gives a car crash. There is clearly a system error with your machine, Sasha. Elena snapped, her voice rising an octave. She snatched the card back, her hands trembling slightly. I have a credit limit that could buy this entire building. I can take a check, Sasha suggested, her voice cooling. Or a wire transfer. But I can't release the inventory without the deposit. We have another event inquiring about the orchids. I don't carry checks, Elena hissed. She pulled out her phone. I'm going to call Mark. He's probably updated some security protocol and forgot to tell me. It's ridiculous. She dialed Mark's number. It rang. Once. Twice. 3 times. Usually, Mark answered on the second ring. Hi, El. Everything okay? 4 times. You have reached the voicemail of Mark Vance. Please leave a message. Elena hung up. She stared at the phone. She opened her banking app. She needed to transfer money from the savings to the checking, just to show the shop girl who she was dealing with. She logged in with her Face ID. The dashboard loaded. Accounts. Vance Joint Operations. Access restricted. Call bank. Savings. Access restricted. Call bank. The numbers were gone. The balances were replaced by gray text. Elena stood frozen. The smell of the flowers suddenly felt cloying, suffocating. She looked up and saw Sasha watching her, hand hovering over the inventory list. Elena, Sasha asked, should I release the orchids to the other client? The humiliation hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't just the money, it was the exposure. She was standing in a shop she had patronized for years, wearing a $2,000 coat, unable to pay for flowers. Hold them, Elena said, her voice tight and unfamiliar. I'll be back. I need to go to the bank branch. It's a fraud alert. Obviously. She turned and walked out. She tried to keep her head high, but she moved too fast. She pushed through the glass door into the rain, the wind whipping her hair across her face. She stood on the sidewalk, the cold water soaking into her coat. She looked at her phone again. Access restricted. For the first time in 7 years, Elena Vance checked her wallet for cash. She had $40 and a Metro card. She dialed Mark again. Mark sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor, the city of Chicago spread out below him like a circuit board. The rain had cleared, leaving the sky a bruised purple, but the streets were still wet. On his desk, a set of blueprints for a new mixed-use high-rise in the West Loop was unrolled. He was calculating wind shear loads. It was precise, exacting work that required absolute focus. His phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. It vibrated with the persistence of an angry insect. Elena calling. He let it ring. He picked up his drafting pencil, made a small notation on the margin of the blueprint, and took a sip of lukewarm water. On the 5th buzz, he tapped the speaker icon. Mark. Her voice filled the quiet office, shrill and breathless. He could hear the whoosh of traffic in the background, the honking of horns. She was outside, likely huddled under an awning, stripping away her dignity 1 decibel at a time. "I'm in a meeting, Elena," Mark said. His voice was level, the same tone he used with contractors who were behind schedule. "I have 5 minutes." "To hell with your meeting," she snapped. "I am standing on Randolph Street in the rain because every single card in my wallet is being declined." The florist looked at me like I was a criminal. "What did you do?" Mark leaned back in his Herman Miller chair, steepling his fingers. "I didn't do anything. I told you, I noticed some irregularities in the accounts last night. Large, frequent withdrawals. The bank's fraud algorithm must have triggered a total freeze." "Irregularities?" Elena's laugh was incredulous. "I bought wine. I paid the caterer. It's the same spending we always have. Call them right now and unfreeze it. I have to go back in there and pay Sasha or we lose the orchids for the gala." "I can't just call them, Elena," Mark lied smoothly. "It's a level 3 security lock. It requires in-person verification. I have to go to the branch, sign affidavits, review the last 6 months of statements line by line." "Well, go then." "Go now?" "I can't," Mark said. "I have a site inspection at 2, and the structural review board is coming at 4. I might be able to get to the bank tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow?" The word came out as a strangle. "Mark, are you listening to me? I have the gala committee dinner tonight. I need to buy the centerpiece. I need to pay for my hair appointment. I have things to do." "I understand it's inconvenient," Mark said. "But you're the one who always tells me to handle the finances responsibly. I'm just making sure our assets are secure. We can't be too careful. Identity theft is rampant." There was a silence on the other end. He could hear her breathing, short, sharp intakes of air. She was trying to calibrate her next move. She realized anger wasn't working, so she shifted tactics. She softened her voice, injecting that familiar, manipulative sweetness that used to work on him like a drug. "Mark, honey," she said, "I know you're busy. I know you work so hard for us. But this is really embarrassing for me. Please, just for me, can't you leave the office for 30 minutes? Julian is counting on me to sort this out. The whole exhibition relies on these details." Julian. There it was. She couldn't help herself. She prioritized the artist's needs over her husband's time, even while begging for the husband's money. "I'm sorry, Elena," Mark said, his voice hardening just a fraction. "My schedule is set. You might have to use your own cash for the day." "I don't have cash." "Who carries cash?" "Then I guess you'll have to improvise," Mark said. "That's what you always say about me, isn't it? That I lack imagination? I'm sure you and Julian can figure out a creative solution. He's the artist, after all." "Mark, I have to go, Elena. The board is waiting." He didn't wait for her response. He tapped the red button. The office returned to its blissful, air-conditioned silence. Mark stared at the phone. He felt a phantom pulse of adrenaline, but it was quickly replaced by a cold satisfaction. He imagined her standing on the wet pavement, realizing that the placeholder had just walked off the job. He turned back to his computer and opened his email. He composed a message to his assistant. Subject, schedule update body. Cancel my afternoon meetings. I'll be leaving early today. He wasn't going to the bank. He wasn't going to fix anything. He was going to go home, pour himself a drink, and sit in the living room. He wanted to be there when she came home. He wanted to see what a woman who lived on credit looked like when the bill finally came due. But first, he had one more call to make. He dialed the number for the leasing office of the commercial space in River North, the building that housed Elena's gallery. The lease was in his name as the guarantor. "This is Mark Vance," he said when the agent answered. "I'd like to discuss the renewal terms for the gallery space. Specifically, I'd like to discuss the termination clause." Julian's studio was in a converted textile factory in Pilsen, a neighborhood that was gritty enough to feel authentic, but rapidly gentrifying enough to charge $3,000 a month for rent. A rent that Elena usually covered under the guise of gallery stipends. Elena pushed open the heavy metal door, shaking her umbrella. She was shivering. The walk from the train station. She had been forced to take the L, sandwiched between a wet stranger and a student eating a bagel, had left her feeling exposed and raw. Inside, The loft smelled of turpentine, stale cigarette smoke, and the lingering scent of expensive cologne. Julian was standing in front of a massive canvas, shirtless, wearing paint-splattered jeans. He looked exactly like the fantasy she had bought into, wild, untamed, intensely focused. "Julian," she breathed, locking the door behind her. He didn't turn around. "Babe, don't step on the drop cloth. I'm in a flow state right now. The light is perfect." "The light is gray, Julian," Elena snapped, her patience finally fraying. She walked further into the room, her heels clicking on the hardwood. "I need to listen to me. It's been a nightmare morning." Julian finally lowered his brush. He turned, wiping his hands on a rag. He had the kind of face that belonged on a billboard, sharp jaw, brooding eyes. "What's wrong? Did the caterer cancel? Don't tell me it's the wine pairing." "It's Mark," Elena said, dropping her bag onto a velvet armchair. He's messed up the accounts. Some security freeze. My cards are declined. All of them. I couldn't pay the florist." Julian frowned, but it wasn't a frown of concern for her. It was a frown of inconvenience. "So? Just call him and fix it." "I tried. He's playing the bureaucratic card. Says he can't unfreeze it until he goes to the bank in person." Elena paced the room, hugging herself. "I need you to cover the deposit for the orchids, Julian. It's $4,000. Just put it on your Amex, and I'll wire it back to you as soon as Mark sorts this out tomorrow." The silence that followed was different from the silence in the florist's shop. This wasn't shock, it was evasion. Julian threw the rag onto a side table. He picked up a pack of cigarettes and tapped one out, avoiding her eyes. "Elena, you know I don't have that kind of limit. My card is maxed out from the materials for the installation. That neon tubing wasn't cheap." "Maxed out?" Elena stared at him. "I just transferred you $5,000 last week for incidentals." "Yeah, and it's gone," Julian said, lighting the cigarette. He took a drag and exhaled a plume of blue smoke. "Art costs money, El? You know that. That's why you're the patron. You handle the logistics, I handle the vision. That's the deal." "The deal?" Elena felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "Is that what this is? A business transaction?" "Don't be dramatic," Julian sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm just saying, I can't pay for the flowers. That's your department. If you can't pay for them, maybe we just cut the flowers? Minimalism is in." "We can't cut the flowers, Julian. It's the Art Institute gala. People expect a certain level of everything." "Then fix it," Julian shouted, his voice echoing off the brick walls. "Why are you here yelling at me? Go home and make your husband fix it. That's what he's for, right? He's the wallet." The words hit her harder than the rain. He's the wallet. It was a crude, stripped-down version of what she had said on the balcony. He's just a placeholder. She looked at Julian. Really looked at him. Without the filter of her own infatuation, she didn't see a tortured genius. She saw a 30-year-old man living in a loft she paid for, smoking cigarettes she bought, demanding she solve a problem she created to support his ego. "I can't go home," Elena said quietly. "He's at work, and I have no money. I can't even buy lunch." Julian looked at her with a mix of pity and annoyance. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a crumpled wad of bills, and peeled off 2 20s. He held them out to her. "Here," he said. "Grab a salad. Maybe go to a spa or something until Mark gets home. But I really need to finish this piece, Elena. The gala is in 2 days, and if this isn't done, we both look bad." Elena stared at the $40. It was an insult. A handout. She didn't take it. "You're unbelievable," she whispered. "I'm an artist, Elena," he said, turning back to his canvas, dismissing her completely. "Close the door on your way out. The draft is bad for the paint." Elena stood there for a moment, watching his back. He didn't turn around again. He didn't ask if she was okay. He didn't offer to walk her out. She turned and left. The heavy metal door slammed shut with a finality that rang in her ears. Back on the street, the rain had stopped, but the wind had picked up. Elena stood on the corner of 18th Street. She had no flowers. She had no support. She had a husband who was following protocol, and a lover who treated her like an ATM that had just eaten his card. She checked her phone. 1 p.m. She had nowhere to go but the one place she was trying to avoid. She had to go back to the penthouse. She had to wait for Mark. She had to play the role of the dutiful wife, because suddenly, the boring safety of Mark Vance felt like the only lifeline she had left. The penthouse was quiet when Elena returned, a silence that felt pressurized, like the air inside a submarine. She found Mark in the living room, reading a hardcover biography of a bridge architect. He had a glass of water on the coaster. No whiskey, no vice, just pure, terrifying stability. Elena stood in the entryway, dripping water onto the marble floor. She felt small, stripped of the armor that credit limits and lovers' flattery usually provided. I went to the bank, she lied. It was a reflex. The branch manager wasn't there. They said it would take another 24 hours to clear the security flag. Mark turned a page, the paper rasping loudly in the room. That's unfortunate. These algorithms can be aggressive. Unfortunate. Elena stepped into the room, her voice tight. Mark, the Art Institute Gala is tomorrow night. I am the co-chair. I have a table to fund. I have a dress waiting at Neiman's that I can't pick up because my cards are dead plastic. Mark finally looked up. His expression was mild, polite even. Well, we can't have you going naked. This isn't a joke. I need you to write a check. For the dress. For the table. Now. Mark closed the book and set it on his lap. I already handled the table donation. I sent a check directly to the board this afternoon from my personal trust. It's in your name and mine. Mr. and Mrs. Vance. You don't have to worry about your reputation. Elena let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Okay, thank God. And the dress? It's $6,000. I can call personal shopping and give them your card number. Mark shook his head slowly. No. What do you mean, no? I mean, I'm not spending $6,000 on a dress you'll wear for 4 hours, Elena. Not when our joint finances are under investigation for irregularities. It would be irresponsible. Elena stared at him. The blood rushed to her face. Irresponsible? Everyone will be there. The board. The critics. Julian's buyers. I can't wear something off the rack. You have a closet full of dresses, Mark said, gesturing vaguely toward the hallway. Wear the red Valentino. The one you wore to the opera 3 years ago. You looked beautiful in it. The red one. Elena's voice cracked. People have seen it. It's archived. I can't repeat a look for a gala I'm chairing, Mark. It's social suicide. It's fiscal prudence, Mark corrected. He stood up, smoothing his suit jacket. We are in a financial holding pattern, Elena. You need to adapt. Besides, if the art is good enough, no one will be looking at your clothes, right? Isn't that what Julian says? It's about the vision, not the material. He used her own pretenses against her, weaponizing the artistic philosophy she used to belittle him. Elena felt tears prick her eyes, hot, angry tears of frustration. She was trapped. She couldn't buy the dress. She couldn't scream at him because he had technically paid the donation. He was being the good husband on paper, while systematically suffocating her in reality. You're enjoying this, she whispered. I'm managing a crisis, Mark said. I'll be ready at 6 tomorrow. I assume you want me there? Elena looked at him. She needed him there. A woman alone at a gala with a declined credit card was a tragedy. A woman with a wealthy, steady husband on her arm was a power player, regardless of what dress she wore. Yes, she said, the word tasting like ash. I need you there. Good. Mark walked past her toward the kitchen. I'm making pasta. Simple. We should probably eat in tonight. Restaurants are expensive. Elena watched him go. She walked to her bedroom, their bedroom, and opened the massive walk-in closet. It was filled with silk, chiffon, and velvet. Rows of shoes lined the walls like trophies. She found the red Valentino. It was pushed to the back, encased in plastic. It was a stunning dress, structurally perfect, but to her, it looked like a shroud. Wearing it meant admitting defeat. It meant she hadn't evolved. She sat on the floor of the closet, surrounded by a fortune she couldn't liquidate, and pulled the red fabric into her lap. She thought of Julian, who wouldn't even buy her a salad. She thought of Mark, who was currently boiling water in the other room, controlling the temperature of her entire existence. She realized then that the gala wasn't going to be a celebration. It was going to be a performance. And for the first time in her life, she didn't know if she knew the lines. The grand ballroom of the Art Institute was a cavern of gold leaf and shadow, smelling of expensive lilies and ambition. The air was thick with the hum of 300 of Chicago's wealthiest patrons, a sound that usually comforted Elena like a lullaby. Tonight, it sounded like static. She stood near the entrance, a glass of champagne trembling slightly in her hand. The red Valentino dress fit her perfectly. It was timeless, elegant, structural, but to Elena, it felt like a neon sign flashing failure. She caught the eye of a board member's wife, who smiled. Elena imagined the subtext. Didn't she wear that at the Lyric Opera? Are the Van Cess having liquidity issues? Mark stood beside her, a tuxedo-clad statue. He nodded at passing acquaintances, shook hands with the firmness of a man who had nothing to hide. He was the perfect accessory. Smile, Mark whispered, not looking at her. The photographer is panning left. Elena forced the corners of her mouth up. I feel sick, she hissed through her teeth. Have a canopy, Mark replied smoothly. You need the blood sugar. Across the room, near the spotlighted installation of twisted neon and steel, stood Julian. He was wearing a velvet blazer, holding court with a group of potential buyers. He looked radiant. He hadn't looked at Elena once since they arrived. He was consuming the attention she had curated for him, fed by the money her husband had provided. I need to talk to him, Elena said, taking a step forward. Mark's hand closed gently but firmly around her elbow. No, you're the co-chair, Elena. You stay here. We greet the donors. That's the job. He's the artist, she corrected quickly. He's busy, Mark said. Look at him. He doesn't need you right now. He has what he wanted. Elena watched as a young, wealthy heiress from the North Shore laughed at something Julian said, touching his arm. Julian leaned in, whispering something back. The intimacy of the gesture punched the air out of Elena's lungs. It was exactly how he used to look at her. The dinner chimes rang. The crowd began to migrate toward the tables. They were seated at table 1, the prime spot. Julian was seated across from them, next to the heiress. Throughout the first course, Elena tried to catch his eye. He avoided her gaze with the skill of a seasoned grifter, focusing entirely on the woman to his right, who was wearing a new season Chanel. By the time the main course, a truffle risotto, arrived, Elena's composure was fracturing. She felt the walls of the room closing in. The silence from Julian, the weight of Mark's calm beside her, the old dress. It was too much. She stood up abruptly. I need some air. She walked quickly toward the terrace doors, ignoring the looks. She stepped out onto the balcony overlooking Millennium Park. The city lights blurred in her vision. A moment later, the door opened. She turned, expecting, hoping, for Julian. It was Mark. He closed the door behind him, muffling the sound of the string quartet. The silence of the city night rushed in. You're making a scene, Mark said quietly. He walked over to the stone railing, standing a few feet away from her. I can't do this, Mark, Elena said, her voice shaking. I can't play this game anymore. Unfreeze the accounts. Stop punishing me because I overspend on a few dinners. It's cruel. Mark looked at her. The shadows of the city cut across his face. You think this is about money? What else would it be? Elena cried. You're controlling me. You're jealous because I have a life outside of your boring blueprints and your concrete. Mark turned to face her fully. His expression was devoid of anger, which made it terrifying. It was the face of a man who had already grieved and moved on. I was on the terrace, Elena, he said. Elena froze. What? Tuesday night, Mark continued, his voice steady. I came home early. I was in the living room. The door was open. I heard you on the phone with him. The blood drained from Elena's face. The wind off the lake suddenly felt freezing. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Mark took a step closer. He didn't yell. He didn't point a finger. He just delivered the words with the precision of a structural collapse. You told him I was safe, Mark said. You told him I paid the bills. You told him I was just a placeholder. Elena gripped the stone railing. The word hung in the air between them, stripped of all its secrecy. Mark, she scrambled for a lie, an explanation, anything. I didn't mean it like that. It was just talk. It was just drama. I love you. Mark smiled, a sad, thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. No, you don't. You love the life I built for you. You love the platform. And tonight, I'm letting you see what the platform looks like when the supports are removed. He checked his watch. I'm leaving now, he said. The car is waiting for me. You can stay. I'm sure Julian will give you a ride home. Oh, wait. He doesn't have a car, does he? Mark, please, Elena whispered, reaching for his sleeve. Don't leave me here. Mark pulled his arm away. Enjoy the evening, Elena. You wanted passion? You wanted excitement? Figure it out. He turned and walked back into the ballroom. Through the glass, Elena watched him navigate the crowd, shake a few hands, and disappear toward the exit. She looked across the room at Julian. He was laughing, clinking glasses with the heiress. He hadn't even noticed she was gone. Elena Vance stood alone on the balcony in her 3-year-old dress, surrounded by the beautiful, expensive city she could no longer afford. Getting home was the final humiliation of the night. Julian had left with the heiress to discuss a commission he had claimed over his shoulder, not bothering to introduce them. Elena, standing in her archived Valentino gown, had been forced to spot a neighbor, a tax attorney named Mrs. Gable, in the lobby and feign a headache. My driver had an emergency. Elena had lied, her smile brittle. Could you possibly drop me? It's on your way. The ride was excruciating. Mrs. Gable talked about her grandchildren and the humidity, while Elena stared out the window, clutching her beaded clutch like a lifeline. When she was finally dropped off at the building, she didn't even have the cash to tip the doorman. She walked past him with her head down, feeling the heavy glass doors seal her inside the lobby like a specimen in a jar. The penthouse was dark when she entered. Not the cozy, ambient darkness of a home settling in for the night, but the absolute, void-like darkness of an uninhabited space. Mark, she called out. Her voice echoed off the marble floors. There was no answer. She kicked off her heels, leaving them where they fell, and walked down the hallway toward the master bedroom. She expected to find him there, perhaps packing a suitcase, perhaps waiting to yell at her. She was ready for a fight. She had rehearsed her lines in the elevator. I was drunk. It was a mistake. You're overreacting. She pushed open the double doors to the master suite. The room was pristine. The California king bed was made. The duvet pulled taut. But something was wrong. The symmetry was broken. Elena walked to the right side of the bed, Mark's side. The nightstand was bare. Usually, there was a stack of architectural journals, a coaster, a charging station, a lamp. Now, the mahogany surface was wiped clean, reflecting the moonlight. She pulled open the top drawer. Empty. No reading glasses. No watch case. She ran to the walk-in closet. His side, usually a regimented row of gray and navy suits, was vacant. The hangers were still there, wire skeletons clinking softly together in the draft from the air vent. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in her chest. He had left. He had actually left her. She turned and ran back into the hallway, her breath catching in her throat. Mark. Then she saw it. At the far end of the corridor, past the kitchen and the living room, was the guest suite. It was a room they rarely used, reserved for Mark's mother or the occasional visiting client. A thin line of yellow light spilled from beneath the door. Elena walked toward it, her bare feet silent on the hardwood. She stopped outside the door. She could hear the faint sound of typing, the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of a keyboard. She reached for the handle. Locked. She rattled it, anger suddenly overriding her fear. Mark, open this door. The typing stopped. Mark, she shouted, pounding the wood with the flat of her hand. You can't just lock yourself in the guest room. This is my house too. We need to talk about this. His voice came through the door, muffled but distinct. It sounded calm, detached, like he was speaking to a solicitor. Go to sleep, Elena. I'm not going to sleep, she screamed. You embarrassed me in front of the entire board. You left me there. And now you're, what? Moving out. I haven't moved out, Mark said. I've just relocated to a sector of the house that I can maintain. The master suite is expensive real estate. I'm downsizing. Stop talking like an engineer, she sobbed, leaning her forehead against the painted wood. I'm your wife. No, Mark replied. You made it very clear what I am. And I made it very clear what you are. We are currently coexisting until the legal paperwork is drafted. I suggest you get some rest. You have a lot of explaining to do to the gallery board tomorrow regarding your missing donation. What missing donation? You said you sent the check. I said I handled it, Mark corrected. I sent a check. But given the current freeze on the joint assets, I imagine it might bounce by morning. Elena stepped back from the door as if it were hot. You wouldn't, she whispered. The typing resumed. Clack, clack, clack. He wasn't listening anymore. He had walled himself off, not just with a locked door, but with a terrifying indifference. Elena turned and looked back down the dark hallway toward the empty master bedroom. It felt cavernous. She walked back to it, the silence pressing against her ears. She climbed into the bed, wearing her gala dress because she didn't have the energy to unzip it. She lay in the center of the mattress, shivering. She reached out and touched the cold, empty space where Mark used to be. For 7 years, that space had been warm. It had been safe. It had been the foundation she stood on to reach for the stars with Julian. Now, the foundation was gone, and she was falling. The morning after the gala, the sky was a brilliant, mocking blue. Elena sat in her office at the gallery in River North, the space she had curated with such precision. White walls, polished concrete floors, the smell of espresso and expensive potential. But the air was thin. Her assistant, a young woman named Sophie who usually looked at Elena with hero worship, stood in the doorway holding a tablet. Sophie did not look worshipful today. She looked frightened. Elena, Sophie said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The treasurer just called. The donation check. The one for the table last night. It was returned. Insufficient funds. Elena gripped her pen until her knuckles turned white. That's impossible. Mark said he handled it. They said they tried to run it twice, Sophie continued, stepping into the room and closing the door. Beatrice is asking for a meeting. She's very upset. She said a bounce check from the Vance family is unprecedented. Elena felt the room tilt. In their circle, adultery was a gossip item. A bounce check was a moral failing. It was the difference between being interesting and being insolvent. Tell Beatrice I'll meet her for lunch, Elena said, forcing a mask of calm onto her face. It's a bank error. I'll explain everything. She arrived at Le Colonial at noon. It was the place to be seen. High ceilings, palm fronds, the clatter of silver on porcelain. Beatrice, the board president, was already seated. She was a woman of 60 with hair like spun steel and eyes that missed nothing. Elena slid into the booth, ordering a sparkling water. She launched her offensive immediately. Beatrice, I am so humiliated about the check, Elena began, leaning in. But you have to understand. Marcus, he's not himself. He's going through some sort of midlife crisis. He's frozen our assets to control me. It's financial abuse, really. He's trying to punish me for my success. She waited for the sympathy. She waited for Beatrice to reach across the table, pat her hand, and promise support. Beatrice took a slow sip of her iced tea. She set the glass down with a precise clink. Elena, Beatrice said coolly, Mark Vance has designed the foundations of 3 of the buildings we are currently sitting near. He has balanced the books for the charity ball for 5 years. He is the most stable man in Chicago. Stable? Elena scoffed, a desperate edge creeping into her voice. He locked me out of our accounts. He's vindictive. Or perhaps he's tired, Beatrice said. The older woman's gaze drifted over Elena's shoulder. People talk, Elena. We saw the balcony last night. We saw you leave alone. And we saw who you were with before that. Elena froze. I don't know what you mean. Julian. Beatrice said the name like it was a cheap wine. The boy is talented, sure. But he's a liability. And frankly, darling, everyone knew it was Mark's money keeping that boy afloat. If Mark has cut the cord, it's not abuse. It's a correction. Beatrice signaled for the check. The board is meeting tonight. We're going to ask for your resignation as co-chair. We can't have this kind of instability attached to the museum. Elena sat stunned as Beatrice stood up, smoothed her skirt, and walked away. The lunch hadn't lasted 10 minutes. Elena was left alone in the booth. She looked around the restaurant. She saw faces she knew, women she had hosted at her penthouse, men she had charmed at openings. They all looked away. They studied their menus. They checked their phones. The Whisper network had made its judgment. They sided with the structure, not the decoration. Panic clawed at her throat. She needed an ally. She needed someone who didn't care about money or boards. She needed Julian. She pulled out her phone. She hadn't heard from him since the gala. She opened Instagram. There, at the top of her feed, was a post from the heiress, the girl with the Chanel dress from the night before. Location, Teterboro Airport, private hangar. Caption, whisking the genius away to Art Basel, Miami. Inspiration awaits. The photo was a selfie. The heiress was beaming, holding a glass of champagne. And next to her, leaning back in the leather seat of a private jet, was Julian. He was smiling that same brooding, magnetic smile he used to give Elena. He wasn't painting. He wasn't suffering for his art. He was simply upgrading his sponsor. Elena stared at the screen until it went black. She had called Mark a placeholder. But sitting there in the wreckage of her social life, she realized the truth. Mark wasn't the placeholder. He was the anchor. Julian was the placeholder. And she was just the transition period. The stepping stone the heiress had just stepped over. Her phone buzzed. A notification from her bank app. Alert, joint account closed. Alert, lease termination notice, 224 W River North, Gallery. Mark wasn't just freezing the accounts anymore. He was dismantling the infrastructure. Elena stood up. She had to walk out of the restaurant past the people who were pretending not to see her. She had to go back to a home where she was a guest, to a husband who looked through her, and pack a bag. Because for the first time, she understood the price of the ticket she had been trying to buy. The elevator ride up to the penthouse took 45 seconds. Elena counted them. It was a familiar ascent, one she had made thousands of times with bags of shopping, with friends, with the casual arrogance of ownership. Today, it felt like a ride to the gallows. When the doors slid open, the apartment was silent. The late afternoon sun cut across the floor in long, dusty beams. The space looked different. It wasn't just quiet, it was staged. Cardboard boxes were stacked neatly near the entryway. They weren't Mark's. They were hers. Mark was sitting at the dining table, a single manila envelope in front of him. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't working. He was just waiting. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing forearms that looked capable of dismantling anything they touched. Elena walked in, her footsteps echoing. She felt the phantom weight of the placeholder comment hanging in the rafters. "You packed my things," she said. It wasn't a question. "I had the housekeeper do it," Mark replied, his voice even. "I thought it would be easier for you. You don't handle logistics well." Elena dropped her purse on the counter. She didn't have the energy to argue. The fight had drained out of her in the restaurant booth when she realized she was invisible. "Julian is gone," she said. She didn't know why she told him. Maybe she wanted him to gloat, to yell, to give her something to push back against. Mark didn't blink. "I assumed he would be. He's a variable dependent on funding." The funding stopped. "Is that all this was to you?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "An equation? You just shut me off?" "You shut us off, Elena," Mark said. He tapped the envelope. "I just formalized the timeline." He slid the envelope across the mahogany table. It made a dry, rasping sound. "What is this?" "Divorce papers," Mark said. "And an offer. A settlement." Elena approached the table. She looked at the thick stack of documents. "I get half. That's the law in Illinois. Equitable distribution." "Read the prenup, Elena," Mark said softly. "The one you signed because you said you didn't care about my money, remember? You wanted to prove you loved me for me." Elena felt a cold flush of nausea. She remembered. 7 years ago, blinded by the romance of the wedding, she had signed everything he put in front of her. "The infidelity clause is robust," Mark continued, his tone clinical. "And I have the recording from the terrace. I have the credit card statements showing the hotels, the dinners, the supplies for his studio. It's all there. Documented. Itemized." He leaned back. "But I'm not interested in a long court battle. I don't like waste. So here's the offer." Elena opened the envelope. A check fell out. It wasn't a fortune. It was enough for a deposit on a modest apartment and perhaps 6 months of living expenses. It was a severance package. "Take it," Mark said. Sign the papers. You keep your jewelry, your clothes, and your car. You leave the gallery lease. I've already paid the termination fee. You leave the penthouse. And we never speak again. Elena looked at the check, then at Mark. He looked at her with an expression she finally recognized. It wasn't hate. It was pity. Why, Mark? She whispered. Why did you have to do it like this? You could have just yelled. You could have just asked for a divorce. Mark stood up. He walked over to the window, looking out at the skyline he helped build. Because you didn't just cheat, Elena, he said, his back to her. You dismissed me. You stood on this terrace and told another man that my entire existence was just a placeholder for your real life. You reduced 7 years of my devotion to a temporary utility. He turned around. His eyes were dry. So I showed you what happens when the utility is shut off. Elena looked around the room. The art she had chosen, the rug she had imported. None of it was hers. It was all stage dressing for a play that had been canceled. I have nowhere to go tonight, she said, her voice small. There's a hotel near the airport, Mark said. I booked you a room for 3 nights. It's paid for. Consider it the final bill. He gestured to the boxes. The movers are downstairs. They're waiting for your signal. Elena realized then that there was no negotiation. There was no second chance. Mark Vance, the boring, predictable engineer, had engineered her complete removal from his life with 0 structural damage to himself. She picked up the envelope. She didn't look at him again. She couldn't bear to see the stranger she had married. Goodbye, Mark, she said. Goodbye, Elena. She turned and walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. The doors opened immediately, as if the building itself was eager to expel her. She pulled the first box toward her, the wheels scraping on the marble. As the doors closed, she saw Mark sitting back down at the table, opening his laptop. He was already moving on to the next project. She was just a line item that had been redlined. The elevator descended, taking her down to the street, to the noise, to the reality of a life she now had to pay for herself. 6 months later, the Chicago winter finally broke. The ice on the lake cracked into jagged plates, dissolving into the dark, churning water beneath, and the city exhaled a collective breath of relief. In a cramped studio apartment in Edgewater, miles away from the Gold Coast, Elena Vance, now just Elena Miller, sat at a small laminate table. The window looked out onto a brick wall and a fire escape. It was a far cry from the panoramic skyline view of the penthouse, but it was what she could afford. She was sorting through her mail. There was a utility bill, a flyer for a discount grocery store, and a glossy art magazine she hadn't canceled yet. She hesitated, then peeled the plastic wrap off the magazine. The cover feature was a profile on Chicago's new wave. And there, staring back at her with brooding intensity, was Julian. He was wearing a suit she had never seen, standing in a gallery in New York. The headline read, "The Raw Emotion of Julian K. Art Without Compromise." Elena scanned the article. It mentioned his meteoric rise, his unapologetic vision, and his new fiancée, the heiress who supported his genius from the start. There was no mention of Elena. No mention of the gallery in River North. No mention of the woman who had paid his rent, bought his paints, and destroyed her marriage to give him a platform. She had been erased from his narrative as efficiently as Mark had erased her from his finances. She closed the magazine and slid it into the recycling bin. She checked the time. She had to be at her shift at the design boutique in 20 minutes. She wasn't the manager. She wasn't the curator. She was a sales associate. She spent her days folding scarves and explaining to customers why a ceramic bowl cost $80. She grabbed her purse. Inside, there was a debit card connected to her own bank account. The balance was $1,400. It was money she had earned. It was small, but it was real. She walked out of the apartment, locking the door with a key that felt heavy in her hand. She was free, just like she had wanted. But she had learned that freedom without a foundation is just free-falling. 10 miles south, Mark Vance stood on the observation deck of the new West Loop high-rise. The wind was strong up here, whipping his tie against his chest, but he didn't flinch. He adjusted his hard hat, looking down at the steel skeleton of the building. It was his design. The load-bearing columns were perfectly aligned, distributing the weight of the massive structure into the bedrock deep below the city. Mr. Vance. Mark turned. A young junior engineer was holding a tablet. The final inspection on the support beams is done. We're at 100% integrity. No cracks. Good, Mark said. Sign off on it. He walked over to the edge of the deck, resting his hands on the railing. He had sold the penthouse 3 months ago. The silence there had been too loud. He had bought a brownstone in Lincoln Park, something with character, something that needed work. He spent his weekends sanding floors and restoring woodwork. It was solitary work, but it was satisfying. He thought about Elena occasionally, not with anger and not with longing. He thought of her the way one thinks of a structural failure in a past project, a lesson learned, a miscalculation corrected. He hoped she was okay. He hoped she had found whatever it was she was looking for, though he suspected she never would. He took a deep breath of the crisp spring air. He wasn't a placeholder anymore. He never really had been. He was the one who poured the concrete. He was the one who made sure the walls held up when the storm hit. Below him, the city of Chicago bustled with noise and life, a million stories happening at once. Mark watched the traffic flow like a river of light. He checked his watch. He had a date later that evening, dinner with a woman who was a professor of history. She was quiet, smart, and she paid her own bills. Mark smiled. It wasn't a triumphant smile. It was just the smile of a man who had survived the collapse and cleared the rubble. He turned his back on the view and walked back toward the side office. There was work to do. There were blueprints to review. And for the first time in a long time, the structure was sound.